Okay, let's bring in Femi Awoyemi now, market research analyst and CEO at Proshare Nigeria is live with us now in the studio. Femi, good morning, to you. Now, let's start with the president's statement with regards to the new Hebsman form. Thought on that?
Well, I felt considered long before the initial decision was taken, and he just thought he needed to clarify to the market what needed to happen. But it's obvious, therefore, from that statement that we should be looking forward to the appointment of a new
Okay, let's take a look at this. Let's put something together. We'll put this together, agenda for a new Securities and Exchange Commission. Let's look at the last three CEOs or Director Generals, the title we put it for the SEC. Look at the TV screen. You can see on the TV screen you had Suleiman Danusa, who's now the chairman of the SEC, but a former head of the commission between 1999 and 2004. Then you had Musa Al-Faki, who came in at the peak of the market boom. That was in 2004 through to 2009. And of course, Ms. Aruma Ote, who came in at the end of the market boom when the market had finally melted down, who retired and ended our tenure at the end of 2014. Sorry for that typo there. That was to be 2014 for Ms. Aruma Ote. Now, looking at these three individuals who have been at the helm of the affairs of the SEC for the last decade, as it were. Now, give us your thoughts about an agenda. What kind of stock of Securities and Exchange Commission have we had? Leadership issues, moving us backwards to where we are at the moment.
If you look at those three that you mentioned right now, you just showed right now on your screen, you find that for each and every one of them within contest, they had different, what would I call the contest within which their service need to be measured. However, before that, the one constant thing we can find going forward is Suleiman Danusa, who would therefore be there. He was there in the first one. He was there with Ms. Aruma Ote, and he's still there right now. So therefore, you may find that there may be some level of consistency in staff of the institution. However, what needs to happen is a singular question of what is the role of a regulator in the market now? I think there's it's an understated reality that we keep on operating the Nigerian market as if it's still an arm of government, whereas the things have changed. The Nigerian Stock Exchange should be going towards demutualization so they can function as a private entity. Then the regulator's role, therefore, needs to be properly contextualized, therefore. In most cases, and as you see as new development comes into the market in terms of technology, in terms of product, in terms of service offering, in terms of how funds are even mobilized in societies through private equity, crowdfunding, and what have you, the regulatory regime has to then step back and understand itself that we are not the owners of the market per se, we are just there to regulate the market. Now, the owners of the market, be the NESD, OTC, the FMDQ, the Nigerian capital market, the bond market, the commodities market, those are the issues that it needs to talk about. And so there is role. Goes beyond just investor protection, which limits itself just to equities market. It begins to look at market development issues and begins to look at how can I be a regulator of a market that is transiting into a different environment, as it were. It is not just a case of doing the same old thing and talking about, oh, do we do unclaimed dividends, do we do... Those are routine issues which will be dealt with by a very focused Securities and Exchange Commission. But the larger challenge for the new administration will be like, how do we therefore change our game and change our own mindset as regulators in the Nigerian capital market?
The last 10 years have been very eventful for the Securities and Exchange Commission, and I want you to talk to us a little bit. What are the learning curves, as it were, over the last 10 years? We have had a bittersweet story on the Nigerian capital market, and that had been when your firm published the NCM 2009, talking about leadership change at the SEC, at the Stock Exchange, at the CSCS, including the central bank, way back in 2009. Perhaps you guys had a box, you looked to the Ouija box, and then You knew way back in 2000 that the market requires a new SEC. Now we're talking about a new SEC. Now look at the market from consolidation to the market boom, to the margin loans, to the AMCON intervention, now to the market discipline. Now we're talking about a new takeover of the stock exchange, new team at the stock exchange. It looks like we've never had a very settled period, as it were, for 10 years.
I think the first thing that one must recognize is that sometimes when you predict and you get it right, it seems as if you're smart. But there are trends that you follow, you just follow the trend. One of the most important things that came out from the trend, and something which you yourself worked in, because we understood that we reach out to everybody in the market, and significantly for you, is that in the trend that we see is that we sometimes forget that Nigeria has been achieving incremental growth and positive movements in our capital market, in the economy. And sometimes we gloss over it because we then benchmark ourselves against different standards, and we never had a unified standard. For example, who is the Nigerian capital market benchmarking itself with? First question. Second question, we've done, you remember the Dennis Odife report, the review of the Nigerian capital market, way back then. That was the foundation for us. Then we now went into the one, okay, the last two were done by Mr. Adedotun Sulaiman as well. And by the way, the last one hasn't been seen by anybody. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but I haven't seen it.
The one that was launched late, 2014.
We haven't seen it. But there is some fundamental truths about it. They take into cognizance what is happening with the operators, with the market general, with the economy and whatever, and they begin to look at how they want to move. But the first question is, who are we benchmarking ourselves with?
Oftentimes we speak about South Africa.
Unfortunately, that may not be accurate. What we've found over the time is that we pick certain elements of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. We pick elements from South Africa, and then we then go ahead and just pick one or two few elements from the United Kingdom. The key question is, who do you model yourself after, so that then you then can understand what is going right or wrong? My take on it is this. Over the time, you find that the regulator lags behind it, and nothing presents this much more clearly than what happened in the economic crisis which we found, where we found that it was basically a problem of regulators. They sanctioned everything that went wrong. They approved anything. The market did not do anything wrong. They just approved everything. And then when the whole thing came back, and which we haven't fully resolved, they just put up their hands. And yet they must take responsibility. That is why the regulator, and you go back to what I said to you earlier on, the regulator must understand that their role is not that of a government agency. They hold a public trust to help the market to create what I call the even playing field, where everybody understands that with the Securities and Exchange Commission, this is the process, this is what I have to do, this is what my company have to do, and then we get it done. If anybody steps out of line, we take care of that. But beyond sanctions, enforcement, and supervision, there is a larger role for the Securities and Exchange Commission. Investor protection is there, but the key one is that of market development. You then look at the market in which you are regulating, which lacks depth, breadth, and liquidity in itself. And so what then do you do? The role becomes one of an engagement, not so much of advocacy per se, but then the one that says that, how can I create a nexus? Looking at what Dr. Yemi Kale is doing in Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, which is a very fine job, by the way, and I must mention. So how do I create a nexus between what is going on there and my capital market? And that becomes a challenge for the Securities and Exchange Commission.
One very key question for you, Femi, is do we need a new Securities and Exchange Commission, or we need a new Director General of the SEC?
I think we just need a mindset change in terms of how we see and how the SEC sees itself in terms of its role in the larger thing. I'll give you a quick example. There is a quoted company in Nigeria today who is in a particular segment of the market that is critical to Nigeria. We're talking about exports, we're talking about particular issues. This company happens to be with AMCON for some funding reasons, right? It cannot borrow money because of a CBN law that says if you're with AMCON, you cannot borrow money. People are available to give it money to pay off its debt, to also fund its expansion, but they can't do so. Now you have a Securities and Exchange Commission. What is their role? Because at the end of the day, if they can't do so, that company will close down. Investors would have lost money. You go back to the investor confidence issues. But yet you have an opportunity through the Consultative Regulatory Committee to go back to a CBN and say, look, we have a situation on our hands. How do we become innovative enough and creative enough to solve this problem for that quoted company?
But in the last 10 years, what do we give credit to the SEC? We have the NESDOTC, we have a few new products on the market.
We must give them credit. maybe it's not so much of them. The market itself deserves credit for what he has done. Because these operators and individuals came together. I know the number of hard work they did in putting it together and getting the SEC to work for them. I'm saying the SEC must work more from a different mindset, whereby I stay like a big headmaster in the village and I'm sanctioning people, to be one of a facilitator and the last bastion of regulation. And said, look, gentlemen, let me give you another example. Private equity. That's the next way in which we're going to be able to move funding and to actually fund the whole market. But there's no regulation right now within the private equity market.
It's a game changer.
In the SEC, there's no regulation right now. There's no support. There's no means of explaining how to go about it. And it's working on a fine line between whether, as a private equity, what are you really now? If you raise funds from individuals, how do you protect those people when you therefore make those investments? SEC must not wait. It must engage with the private equity firms and see how they can engage, collaborate with the international firms who are also into private equity and see how they can get involved in Nigeria. If we're thinking we're going to fund, now look at the budget of Nigeria. And you've seen that the capital expenditure about 600 and something billion. We just dropped about something in the Ministry of Works again. Where is the money in the capital market coming in? How does the pension affect it? Now, this is where the SEC says to itself that private equity offers us an opportunity. Also, how do we do crowdfunding in Nigeria, for example? So the real argument for the new SEC is not the old arguments. Those ones are considered routine activities which were relevant there. The market has seemingly moved ahead. The level of sophistication brought about by the operators and the Nigerian Stock Exchange means that the SEC has to get in tune with that technology itself to be able to provide adequate regulation and supervision.
We're going to go on a break. When we come back, I'll remind you of what a little bit of what Munir Guazo said when he took over about 2 months ago, when he said there's a need for a new SEC. That the SEC as an institution needs to be retooled. There has to be a change from within the SEC. So we've been talking about what the SEC had to do. But what about who guards the guardian? Custodial custode. We'll be back with that after the break. You're watching Business Morning here. Femi Awoyemi, research analyst and CEO at Proshare. We're back with the conversation, a new agenda for a new SEC. We'll be back with that.